Hi, Chapin.
Hey Gabby, how's it going?
It's going okay. Just full disclosure, I am multitasking. My husband's out of town, so I probably can't stay much later than 7. Um, you guys can continue to chat, but um, I'm hoping for no kid interruptions, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, sounds good. I know Emma had communicated that she needed to sign off by 7 also.
Okay,
And then Gabby, since we have you on upcoming council agenda for reappointment, and we talked about the terms at a previous meeting. Um, what do you think about having somebody else run the meeting?
sure.
Um, and then
That would actually be, I would love that just to
okay,
not feel like if I get interrupted that, if someone else is being the primary person, that would be great. And
okay.
Dana, I did just see your email about moving it out another month.
Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I think we have to properly notice it first.
Okay. Yep, I just want to make sure we're going by the book so that all the everything's like, yeah. So
But
do we looking for volunteers or Chape? Who's our vice right now? I can't even remember.
I
Scott?
believe I believe Scott is Mayor
Okay.
Greenland ran the meeting last meeting and she was in her office. So I'm not going to ask Mayor Green to do that tonight. So I guess I would
I,
ask
I'm in my
someone
other
else.
office, Chapin.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I thought you might be in the field or helping patients, so I didn't want to
Uh,
burden you with that.
that is exactly my second office, which is where
Okay.
I am.
Okay.
Also not ideal for running a meeting.
Yeah. So I would I
Yeah.
welcome
Yeah.
volunteers other than I don't see see Scott on.
Scott's on. Scott, are you
Okay.
available to run the meeting? No answer. So maybe the answer is no.
I'm having some technical difficulties over here
Okay.
as I switch between phone and computer. I don't, well, I don't have everything in front of me,
Okay.
uh, which will make it challenging.
I nominate Morgan to run the meeting.
Morgan, I second that.
I bet you do.
Do you accept?
Do you have a choice?
Tonight
Not
should be pretty
really.
pretty simple and straightforward. I
Yeah.
have one update and then I'm basically just gonna talk about the code amendments and ask for feedback.
No, yeah, let's do it. This is my third hearing this week, so I'm in it. Let's do this. I'm like Chapin.
So why don't you start with like calling it to order and doing roll call then?
All right. So let me bring up the PDF. Can I just freestyle the intro or do I need to read something?
Sure.
Okay. I call this meeting of the Leadville Planning and Zoning Commission, April 24th, 6 p.m. to begin. Can we do roll call, please?
All right, Mayor Green,
Here.
Commissioner Bauer,
Here,
Commissioner Nisharm,
Here.
Commissioner Law,
Here.
Commissioner Tanous, Commissioner Lobby,
here.
alternate Commissioner Lordson. She did email me and let me know she got in late last night from traveling. She will not be attending tonight. And Gabby Voller, I'm not gonna call on you tonight just for the reasons we mentioned earlier.
Okay. I'm in limbo land.
Progress.
Um, oop. You guys hearing that echo?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think it's me.
Mayor Labbe was the only one unmuted, so I wonder if the feedback was coming from you, Greg.
Oh yeah, I think he's switching maybe.
I went on my
Um,
new computer and it had no video, and obviously you need this video feed of me. It's important. But so I switched over to my old computer and they were both on at the same time. So
busted. Okay. Should we do a approval of the agenda and any revisions?
Staff does not have any changes to the main agenda items. I can provide a couple other general updates, but other than that, I don't think we need to revise the agenda.
Okay. And approval of last meeting's minutes.
No minutes.
Minutes, okay. Great. So now we can move to any public comment or items that are not on tonight's agenda.
I do have one member of the public in my office. I do not see any members of the public on, sorry, we have one member of the public on Zoom. But I believe Christy is here for the main agenda item.
That's correct.
Yeah, I would again like to see public comments at the right before adjournment. An opportunity there on the schematic here for future meetings. And just briefly, I think we need to start thinking about minimizing conflicts of interest. There was an interesting article in the Denver paper today, and I won't go through it, but it just talked about who can be trusted for advice, new rules, strength and protection. And this was about people acting as fiduciaries when they were advisors for retirement plans. I think that can be extended into other governmental decision making. Thank you kindly.
Sure, and that's my fault. We agreed at a previous meeting to get that on the agenda, just kind of doing everything around here right now, and I didn't make that edit, so I'll try to get that on our template going forward.
Okay, great. I do have one other comment actually I wanted to bring up was we had a hearing for the Silver King on Monday night with the county, and I can provide a quick update on that if folks are interested, or if not, happy to skip it too.
yes, please.
Okay, great. So we've been working with the developers who are under contract to buy the property, to convert it to long-term workforce housing. It's approximately 65 units, and we'd be taking it down to 55 and putting in kitchenettes. And yeah, there was obviously a lot of back and forth. Essentially, our hearing got tabled on Monday, which was expected. And that was largely due to what the developers were presenting in terms of deed restrictions for the property. I can share my screen for a minute because actually, sorry, Chapin, can you give me permission to share? See here. So it's a little complicated, but basically what they're proposing is it's breaking it down into two kind of segments, the initial 5 years and the years 5 to 15. So they were saying they do have a master lease with Climax for 5 years for them to essentially master rent the units. The idea is like they're probably not going to need all of them, so Climax is going to work with the county to help support workforce for the county in terms of sheriffs, firefighters, that sort of thing. They're going to prioritize that. But the county essentially didn't go for what the developers were presenting. And again, none of this is, I'm helping with the architecture, but I had very little to do with what they're presenting in terms of deed restrictions. The county felt like they were losing more than they were gaining with what they were proposing here in terms of at least 50% are, you know, Lake County workers for the initial 5 years, and then the years 5 to 15 is really where the county was not on board, which you know, again, from my perspective, I kind of see where they're coming from. It's extremely difficult to get investors or to get money right now, and so after 5 years, they're just not totally sure what's going to happen. So they wanted more flexibility, and obviously what they're committing to in terms of deed restrictions after 5 years is low. So they're basically going to go back and basically talk to their investors and try to figure out a way to get years 5 through 15 up to the initial 5 years, which I think would be, you know, more enticing for the county. But from the county's perspective, you know, I completely see both sides. The county is losing the tax revenue from the commercial property. Obviously, there's tax revenue to be gained with, you know, the occupants and just living here in Lake County, living, working. But you know, they see it as a big loss, as one of their biggest commercial hotel spaces, at least right now. And so they're really pushing for, you know, basically like 100% deed restriction, which I feel like is a big ask, both in terms of like what's possible right now, but also just like from precedent from other projects, like 100% doesn't really happen anywhere else. So in a way, like I understand they're losing something and they really want to make sure they're gaining something for the long term. But it is like, you know, a lot of projects are asking for 25% or, you know, 30 or even maybe up to 50. So, yeah, I mean, again, they're my clients, but I don't have any skin in the game in terms of the outcome. Especially when it comes to this, how they're kind of orienting the deal with Lake County, but I thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah, Morgan, this is Greg. At some point, you know, the developers this has to pencil out, or they're not going to do it.
Totally.
And so I don't know what those numbers look like, but I would suspect that's what they're after, is return on investment. And if the county, the problem with bureaucrats is they don't understand investment and risk.
Yeah.
And so that's where this may be coming from.
A question about the deed restrictions. Are there any income caps, or is this just all based on where you live and where you work and has nothing to do with AMIs?
It has nothing to do with AMIs. The units are too small. So you could put caps in place, but they wouldn't do anything.
Right. So it basically saying like only a certain kind of worker is going to be interested in this unit, and it's going to be more of like a 6 month to 2 year kind of temporary situation anyway. So is that the argument that like income caps don't really matter?
That's their argument. And Heather Lind was in complete agreement about that. She was like, yeah, she said she's not a fan of the AMI caps and would not think it would make sense for this project anyways. So the deed restrictions are fully revolving around making sure that it doesn't become, you know, second home, ski condo, and keeping it primarily within this county, with also the reality that we only have so many people here so looking to adjacent counties, and also trying to take in consideration that 70% of the workforce goes to another county to work.
Right. So saying that keeping the work qualification is the primary factor.
Yep.
Got it.
I just have a question / I guess comment, which is that's a very sharp decline in years 5 to 15 for criteria 1 and 2. And so what? People would just get kicked out of their house? I mean, I don't know. I suppose
I think it would be like the lease runs out and then that unit is now open to different people with different criteria.
Right.
Right, which I just could see how difficult that time period would be for people.
Totally. It does seem like a sharp decline. I wonder if there's like 3 phases. And then I would encourage your client Morgan to maybe talk about how like that preference given to applicants that meet qualifications 1, 2, like how does that work? So an application comes in the door for a unit and someone works in Lake and someone works in Chaffey, and they're gonna like automatically give the unit to the person in Lake, like even if the other person might have like better credit. I think there needs a little
Totally.
more detail about like how that plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the county has asked to get the Lake County Housing Authority involved in helping kind of organize that, and kind of help, yeah, weigh in on it. It's a weird, unique situation.
It doesn't seem to me like the housing authority, as much good work as they're trying to get done, would have the expertise to be involved in this. So it's just a thought.
I think that developers are pretty, you know, they do have good intentions for this, but they're seeing that as a potential way that would really slow down their process in terms of filling units and turnover and all that stuff.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Morgan. It's really an insightful piece of information.
I'm not surprised at all that it was Climax. I thought it was either Climax or Melanzana.
Yeah.
So it's gonna take some investment.
That's the thing too. I think, they're investing millions of dollars into putting new accessible units in, sprinklering the building, putting the kitchenettes in, doing cosmetic stuff. And yeah, I don't think there's it's a very kind of gray situation. So yeah, thanks for looking at it.
I wonder, like, you don't have to have an answer for this, but like, are there studies that exist that would show us as a county what kind of revenue we would gain by having 55 full-time filled units in other areas of the economy besides what a hotel would normally bring in, for us to be able to
Weigh that.
kind of, think about the full picture of what's being lost, yes, but also like what other commercial dollars would be sustained by having.
Right, in terms of like the spending power of those 55.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking those people will
Yeah.
eat downtown, those people will shop, those
Yeah,
people will
I
go.
think that's a fabulous point. And the
Mhm.
reason I say that is like at Community Coffee this morning, Fatima who works for Climax and is, working with their employment, says they have 48 job openings right now. And there may be more than that, but that's what they have advertised right now for job openings. If we bring 48 additional people into the county and they're not here now, and they have a place to live, now the tax dollars from all the things you talked about start to flow. It is meaningful.
Right. And I just think that's a worthwhile, like, I feel really protective of the county, but I also think it's reasonable to consider the actual whole picture of, the dollar amount a full-time, long-term human brings versus a 3-night visitor to a hotel, 2 nights out of a week. And I don't know who would do that study or if other
Right.
studies like that exist, but it could be one way to help smooth the edges to make the deal happen in a way that, like, I deal with this all the time at work where people are only focused on one part and it's like really hard to get everyone to see the big picture. But we could potentially find a lot more benefit than we realize initially by thinking about that kind of thing. And that could, in the long run, perhaps be a value to the conversation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, I think that'd
Yeah,
be
I mean, you can make some assumptions about spending on those 2 different user profiles. I mean, it'd be pretty high level, but
and
Morgan,
what's
you
the-
could recommend to the developer if they wanted to do like a little
right. What's the
like,
average
economic
salary for
benefit
40
study
people?
or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, totally. That's good. Yeah. Cool.
It might
Great.
be helpful to know, like, what's the average tenure of an employee there? How high is their attrition? Like, are these people going to stay for 10 years?
Yeah,
Or
I had a
6
question
months?
about that too. Like, how long are they thinking the leases are gonna be, like 6 months at a time or something like that?
Yeah, I think it would probably vary. I think they'd be open to things as short as 3 months if someone had a lead on a house or something, but I think it would probably be more like 6 months or a year.
That's kind of what they do with the bank building. They consider it transitional
Right.
housing while people find a solution, and they're willing to extend that if they have to. This doesn't sound like the same thing. This sounds like more like permanent rental housing.
Yeah.
Maybe the bank building seems like it's better units for more permanent rental,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, that's
I mean,
it.
it's kind of up to them, I guess.
Maybe they'll rethink that. They paid like $4.3 million for the bank building for what was basically 16 units, apartments. It was a big number.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to think big picture, I can't remember when the mine is still planning on ceasing operations, but like 20 years from now, this is a big bank of like units that might not be used up by mining workers.
Right.
Which is, I mean, there's a good side and a bad side to that, but
I would also be curious to know if on the very off chance that they didn't fill all of the units, what would they do with the empty ones? Like you may have covered this in the last time that you brought this up, but would they be trying to short-term rent? What would that look like, or would they just have to let them sit? Again, you don't have to answer right now, but it's a curiosity I have.
Yeah, no, I don't think there would be no short-term renting allowed. They would just open it up to, as soon as they couldn't do it with their employees. Again, it's those tiers, so it opens it up to anybody in Lake County, working in Lake County, then anyone working in Lake Chaffee, Summit, with the thought that eventually that they'd be able to fill them.
one other thought to give to your clients is like, have they talked to the school district? Like maybe the school district could have second chance after climax. So any
Yeah.
unfilled units that the mine doesn't, I mean, I think that might grease the wheels a little bit.
I think that list is already healthy in terms of like the county, the school district. Everyone's happy to kind of get a few units reserved for them.
No, the hospital is looking for housing.
Right, right. So I don't see them being vacant. And then Aaron, Climax guy was there on Monday and he was like, initially it might be hard to fill up these 55, but we'll get there eventually. But, until we do, we're going to open it up, to Lake County workers that need workforce housing.
Cool.
Hey, Morgan, this is Scott. I kind of think that this would be a missed opportunity to take a really old, kind of a sad building at this point in time, probably built in the late 70s, early 80s, and now revitalize it. I think in terms of maximizing profits, like, building a new hotel and trying to cater towards, the actual visitor guest population might be, better investment than try to revitalize an old building and thinking that it's going to attract travelers. So I think it's a great idea that this project's actually, being considered, and I hope it does, because I think that there's great need in the community in the surrounding area for housing. So I think that would answer a lot of problems with
I
lack
think that's
of
a really good point. Yeah, I think, it's with financing right now, it's so challenging, and like we might keep seeing these duplexes or ADUs or, triplexes, but it's extremely hard to pull off these larger developments, which is why these developers specialize in this kind of project. That again, if we don't get it, or if they don't get it, it's just a question of when we're going to see this type of development happen here. So,
well, I hope things move forward.
yeah, cool. Okay. So I think we're on to number 3, general updates. Chapin, do you have info on the appointments?
Sure. So just want to mention that we will be advertising for one commissioner position and one alternate position. That one alternate position has remained open for a while now. We've advertised it several times without being filled. Both of those, any applicants that we receive, including Gabby's, any applications we receive will be reviewed on the June 4th city council meeting, and that's a mayoral appointment with consent of city council. The other update I have is I'm happy to announce that the city's planning department is growing. So now we have extended an offer last week, and offer has been accepted for a planner one position. I'm happy to announce that that position has been filled by Alex Willis, who is architectural designer here in town, has a degree in architecture, is a Leadville native, and is here in Leadville. Will be starting part-time in about a month from now, 3 days a week, and transitioning to a full-time position in the fall. So very happy to.
Small world. I love it.
Yeah. Very happy to announce that, and looking forward to bring Alex on and for him to work with staff here at City Hall, with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Historic Preservation Commission.
That's great.
Did you get a pretty robust applicant pool? I'm just curious.
We had two locals, and so we had one other applicant who had kind of background in GIS and geography, and we had two master's students and who were wrapping up graduate city planning programs out of state. Those were international students, and then we had another local who had mining experience, along mining history in the community, and those were the kind of the top 5 applicants that we interviewed.
Cool. Back to the P&Z appointments. I am going to be out of town on June 4th. Is that going to be a problem?
Your attendance is not required.
Okay. Mayor Green had said it was encouraged, and I had the May date, but I'm on a work trip on the June 4th.
I think if you could attend via Zoom, if it was possible for a few minutes, that would be encouraged, but it would technically not be required.
Okay. I'll see if I can Zoom in, but I'm not sure exactly what the evening schedule is.
Okay. In the interest of time, that wraps up my staff updates. I'll save other updates for future meetings.
Cool. And then, seeing as there is no new business, I guess we'll continue on to continued business.
Okay. So at the last meeting, we discussed development agreements. I think it was our 3rd discussion of the development agreement ordinance possibilities. This meeting, I'd like to come back to the housing variety amendments. We had, I believe, 12 work sessions on this code package between 2022 and 2023. And tonight I would like to review a fairly simple revision to that code package that the P&Z has spent a lot of time on and has been reviewed by City Council. Before we get into that, I wanted to just remind the P&Z of kind of the status of where we are at. We've had some commissioners who may have missed a few meetings, so I just want to make sure everybody who is here tonight is on the same page. The code amendment package that went to City Council for a work session was, I think, the incentive zoning and the basic some amendments that were originally proposed by the policy advisory team were generally acceptable to City Council, but there was concern by City Council with the incentive zoning, and specifically the 3 or more units and the density that could allow, particularly outside of the historic district where there are not design standards. And there were some questions on how that could be addressed, either with having a ceiling on the number of units that would be allowed by incentive zoning, and also with design standards, and then just generally how that incentive zoning would relate to other possibilities for approval processes in the code, like planned unit developments and other things that are allowed by state statute, like annexation agreements and development agreements. And the council essentially requested to come back with more information to educate council on how that related to the code package. And we did some additional work sessions at the P and Z level, kind of, just for lack of a better word, educating the P and Z, getting everybody on the same page with what our plan unit development agreements and what does our code allow now and what does it not allow, what are annexation agreements that are allowed by state statute and what are the possibilities there, and what are development agreements authorized by state statute and what are the possibilities there. Since that time, we have not made much progress, and I've been really busy, and I haven't had a lot of time to work on code amendments, and I'm recognizing that we are losing some momentum, and I would like to keep some things moving forward. This commission has done a lot of work, and I want to honor that, and I think we have some needs in the communities that need to be filled. We discussed development agreements at the last meeting, which responding to city council's requests, we did come back to city council with a development agreement code package in a work session. And that's what we reviewed at the last meeting. We had a lot of good comments and a good discussion at the last meeting. I would like to finish up the meeting tonight with how the housing variety amendments, and specifically how the one amendment that I'm proposing tonight with the housing variety amendments compares to the development agreement ordinance that we discussed at the last meeting. So that'll be the last thing that we discuss. And I have a graphic tonight that will help compare those that I'd like to discuss with you. But I think the meat of the discussion tonight will be basically my proposed amendment to the housing variety amendments that we have all worked on, and that the last package that went to city council. And essentially what I am proposing is to remove the incentive zoning component that is highlighted here on the screen. I think I have a 2-page memo in your packet, but leave everything else that we've already worked on. And the reason that I am proposing that is because the housing variety amendments, the incentive zoning portion of this was really what was creating the most discussion at city council and the request for additional research. And I would like to dial that back just a bit to keep this code amendment package moving forward still keeping a lot of the things that could really benefit the community in terms of housing, and particularly with accessory dwelling units and duplexes or two family dwelling. So essentially what this is proposing is to keep everything that we've worked on, but remove the language that is highlighted here, which is essentially the incentive zoning piece that would allow in the R2 zone and the TC zone and the C zone to allow the density to increase in exchange for a commitment to 25% of the project as community housing, deed restricted community housing. In the R2 zone and the TC zone, that was proposed to increase essentially from 20 dwelling units per acre to 40 dwelling units per acre. And in the C zone, that was proposed to, I believe, I got to check this, I think it was going from 9 to 19, essentially 20. But all of the other amendments remaining the same. And so I have those highlighted on the screen. I'm sorry, not highlighted on the screen, but shown here on the screen. And so they range from increasing maximum lot coverage, exempting ADUs from minimum floor area size, increasing the ADU floor area size relative to the main house from 50 to 60%. And then actually, so those are all things that are making it the code more permissive. But then there was we discussed reducing the maximum allowed height for ADUs, so that actually be more prohibitive. But we also discussed how it still allows for an ADU above a garage with a standard gable roof, considering we have a permissive building height and how that calculation is made. And then so those were things that were all originally proposed by the policy advisory team. And then in addition, things that are additionally proposed by staff in the P&Z would be increasing maximum density limitations. And this was due to my concern with using minimum lot size as a way to regulate intensity of development. And we also got into parking. So adding a parking requirement that is not in the code right now for ADUs and for 2-unit development. And then also requiring where possible for that additional off-street parking to be alley loaded. And then the last thing is just a housekeeping item to include in the definitions in the code, how density is calculated. And that was, we reviewed that, I think at the last work session, we reviewed this code package. So generally everything that is shown here that's not scratched out or that's not highlighted is proposed to continue. And these are all things through our 12 work sessions that we have reached majority consensus on. And I think we have actually, the things that are shown as struck through in white are actually things that were not proposed by the PAT, but not fully supported by the P&Z. So honoring some commissioners' concerns with those items. So I think what we have is a code package that essentially it targets ADU development and 2-unit development, so duplexes. And again, this is for market rate development, so allowing the private sector to have more flexibility for the smaller infill development, which could certainly meet a portion of our housing needs in the community. So the questions that I would have for some guiding questions to decide next steps tonight for the commission would be, I guess, one, does the commission understand what I am proposing, and if so, do you support this? And again, this is with the idea of just dialing this back to something that I think that council will be supportive of moving forward right now, and we can continue to work on the incentive zoning later this year, rolling into next year as needed, as staffing allows and as budget allows. And then if the commission is supportive, is the commission ready for this to go to city council with support of the P&Z? And I can take any questions or open it up for discussion. Thanks.
Thank you for keeping track of all of this. I do have a question about the 3 to 10. I mean, I'm a little sad about it, but I mean, I guess I understand. But the thing that I'm trying to make myself feel better about it is that there's a lot more parcels there's not actually that many opportunities for that 3 to 10. Like the parcel has to be big enough, like all that stuff. And so I feel like we're not eliminating tons of opportunities, and some of those larger parcels, they have other development pathways. Like they could go through the development agreement method, they could go through a PUD. They're basically just not going to be allowed to, like, through our straight zoning, be able to use that density bonus mechanism. Is that correct? Like there's potentially other pathways for those larger parcels to develop in a dense way.
Yeah, I think the short answer for that is yes. I think the clarification on that is on the smaller side of that spectrum. So like 3 to 5 unit development.
Right.
I think that is absolutely something that we need to stay on. So I think, following on, if this code package were to go forward, as soon as I have some help here in this office, I mean, I would like to stay on that, because all the time I have people. I could go ahead and say every day I have someone calling or walking in the office saying, "Hey, I'd like to develop on this property. What can I do?" And that comes in a variety of forms, whether it's I want to add a unit, and then I do the density calculation and say, "Oh, this property actually allows 3 units." And they're like, "No way, I can build 3 units on this property." And so it could be an existing property where someone has a house, but they actually own 3 lots.
Right.
And it could be a vacant property that is actually 3 lots, and but it's shown as being sold as 1 property. So it comes in a variety of forms. But I would say so frequently I do density calculations, and I see that properties where people are actually only wanting to build a second unit actually allows 3 or 4 or 5 units. And so there is the potential for all if everything else in the code allows it, and that assumes that it's allowed by, if it's in the historic district, that the historic district design standards allow it. That I think that there is the potential for us to see infill smaller development like townhomes, for example, you know, a threeplex, a fourplex, a fiveplex. And, you know, we've already done some work last year with the ordinance 2, which was the table of uses update, which allows 3 and 4 unit development to be a by right use. So the last remaining piece for that is density. But, you know, going back to our initial conversations where I started working with this group, taking the PAT recommendations and kind of running it through the, you know, my filter of staff and then the P&Z's feedback through a variety of work sessions. You know, the main concern that I had, which was proposed by the PAT, was just how we're regulating intensity. And I had, I expressed concerns with doing that with just lot size. But there were so many other good pieces of this that, you know, that need to move forward. And so, you know, so the whole basis for recommending the incentive zoning was for, you know, for this 3+ unit development, so that we weren't necessarily giving away free density without having some kind of connection to affordable housing. And, you know, because we didn't have any other kind of mechanisms in place to have the private sector have some kind of commitment to affordable housing component of projects. And just recognizing that where like, for example, minimum lot size only is used without any kind of incentive zoning, like in larger municipalities, you know, for example, the Front Range of Denver. I had concerns that our community is very different, and that we should have some kind of way to connect that, you know, 3+ unit development with affordable housing in some way. And so that was my proposal. I think it still needs some work, and we still need to get everybody on the same page, and there's more research that needs to be done. But there's so many other good pieces here that should move forward to respond to our housing needs. And so I think dialing this back, so we're just focusing on ADUs and duplexes to move this forward, but absolutely not losing sight of incentive zoning, but just pushing that out a little bit and separating it so we can address all of those questions as a separate code package.
Yeah, that one seems like the outlier for sure. Obviously, it's a bummer not to include it, and maybe I missed this, but they're potentially open to it? They just want to see it in a different grouping, or they took real issue with it?
That's a great question. So I think they were generally supportive, but the questions and the concerns were if we're not just talking about a triplex that meets the historic district standards, if we're talking about a 10-unit development on a large piece of property that's outside of the historic district without design standards, what does that project look like, and how does that have the potential to affect the character of the community and the surrounding neighborhood? And I think those are valid questions. And so it's not to say that if that were passed, there could not be another code package, another ordinance that could work to address that, like, for example, design standards for or code amendments to address what projects look like outside of the historic district. So you could always, break this into pieces as much as you wanted to, but that was the concern. How would we address that? And I have, drafts of answers to that, but I need to work through that with the Planning and Zoning Commission first. And essentially just came back to, staffing. We've discussed that. So to answer your question, Morgan, they were not opposed to the incentive zoning by any means. They had questions that we haven't had time to address.
Chapin, thank you for pointing out a lot of the other valuable parts of the proposed code amendments. I admit I was one of the people who, while not against the density, was just concerned about design guidelines outside of the historic district, but principally because I'm just opposed to Eastern Bloc style multifamily or community housing designs, and also on the flip side, opposed to giant mansions with copper roofs in our area. But I'm wondering if it is if it is too cynical to suggest that now that the makeup of council is so different, if it would be worthwhile to reintroduce the incentive zoning amendment suggestions.
I think it's possible, but I don't know that that is any more productive. In other words, I mean, there's essentially, you know, there's essentially no difference in terms of timing of adoption with, I think, realistically in terms of moving this code package forward without the incentive zoning. Because that allows when I do have to focus on the how the incentive zoning, that allows me to just really focus in on that. And so, you know, assuming no delays and ample staff time and capacity and all those things, I mean, I think realistically, assuming council is supportive, all of those things could get passed this year. And I would you know, personally, professionally like to see that happen. But I want everyone to be really comfortable with it. And I don't want it to be something that people feel like they have unanswered questions or unanswered concerns. And so yes, I think it's possible that we could go back to city council, but I would not recommend it. I think we can get both of the, assuming city council will be supportive, I think we can get all of this done this year.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your diplomacy.
Emma has her hand up.
Can you guys hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, I had to switch to my phone and I have no idea what's happening. I can't see any of you, but I hope you can still hear me. Let's see. I think Gabby and Morgan both asked the same questions that I had. And Chapin, I think your comment in answer to Morgan's question is really helpful to me because it sounds like city council was able to kind of point to some potential loopholes that I feel sure all of us here would rather spend time solving than putting the cart before the horse just to push this through. Because if you have people coming into your office every single day, then for sure there would likely be at least one project that would slip through that everyone would be like, oh man, wish we'd thought of that, or wish we had a design standard for that, or wish we had something for that. And so I am on board to take the edits you've put here and pass the rest without this specificity and make sure we're doing it right and make sure we're really you know, creating any code documentation or links to other amendments or guidelines that we need to in order to make sure that we don't look back and end up, you know, foot and mouth. So hopefully you all can hear me. I don't know how to, I'm going to try and go back to mute now.
Thanks for your comment, Em. And that actually brings up one thought that I forgot to mention, just regarding city councils, regarding just the city council work session. So when we were at city council, you know, we acknowledged that the incentive zoning would require, you know, a certain percentage of the project as community housing, and community housing has to be defined. And that community, we were going to have a community housing chapter drafted anyway. So even when we were going to city council, it was not ready for adoption. Even if we put it, what we had, it red lines into ordinance form, we still wouldn't have a community housing chapter. And so we would have to, I mean, I asked the P&Z if P&Z preferred me to write that or to hire a consultant to do that. And the P&Z kind of unanimously said, hire a consultant. Which I have a pretty small budget for it, and I haven't been able to really find much interest in for that budget. So there was already going to be some work that had to be done that would push out the timeline for adoption of the project anyways, even if council was 100% supportive of what we already had. So there was already going to be a delay, and so I think considering that there was already that delay, the city council had some questions which we need to answer. So I think both of those are reasons to cut this out and move forward with the rest. Kind of as you mentioned, you were supportive of.
Looks like Christy has her hand up. Can we allow her to chime in? Go ahead, Christy.
Thank you, Morgan. I have two things that I wanted to share. The first is just a piece of information. There are a handful of community members who are willing to or interested in putting in an ADU in their backyard, specifically with the intent to house some of our homeless community members who might not be able to live in congregate shelter or apartments due to disabilities. And so they have identified that the first barrier to getting something like that done is getting this code amendment pushed through. So just wanted to share that. I don't have like an official statement from that group. They just wanted me to bring that up. And then the second is I do have an official statement from the policy advisory team that was approved by Build a Generations Housing Coalition that I would like to share with you all. Build a Generations Policy Advisory Team would like to express our strong desire to see the adoption of the Housing Diversity Code Amendment move forward quickly. The issue has been in progress for over 3 years since the original recommendation. Although the additional idea of incentive zoning is important, it has greatly hampered the progress of the code amendment, ultimately preventing the infill development of ADUs and duplexes. It is important to remember that there will never be a housing policy that flawlessly addresses all issues at once. Rather, we must adopt multiple policy amendments to address this crisis. We urge you to take swift action to move this issue forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you.
My interpretation of those remarks is that that's in line. Let's move part of this forward. I do have I would love to like make sure that whether it's late 2024 or early 2025, we like revisit that 3 to 10. And I wonder if it's worth breaking it out. I feel like to that 3 to 5 and the 5 to 10 or 6 to 10, because I feel like those might be slightly different animals. As a way to kind of preserve some of the character issues, but we can talk about that another time. Morgan, this is where you say, are there any other comments? Let's move on.
Does anyone else like to make a comment on this, or should we? It sounds like there's a general agreement.
I would say we've discussed this pretty endlessly, and it's time to act.
I do not think we need to schedule another joint work session to review this. I think we can just send it on, right? To answer your question in the document, Chapin. I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding the process, like do whatever we need to do to get it through, is what I think.
Agreed.
Hey, Morgan, this is Scott. I would agree with them. I was curious though, does this density actually change any of the setback issues?
No, there was a setback reduction proposed by the policy advisory team, and that I'm showing that. I'll put that in the middle of the screen, and that is the item that was one of the items that was not supported by the P&Z, and we removed that from the code package.
Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I think we ought to proceed.
Do we need to take a vote on this or anything, Chapin, or do you have what you need to keep moving this forward?
So I'm gathering that the consensus of the commission is that they support these proposed amendments. So in other words, everything that we've already worked on with the removal of the incentive zoning piece and saving that for later, but sooner than later. And then I'm gathering that the commission is not finding there's a need to discuss this with city council. And so I can proceed with kind of the most efficient way to move this through the public hearing process. Mayor Green, I would like to update the city council as early as possible about this work session that we've had, and make sure that the city council at a meeting has an opportunity to let me know if they have a desire to have another work session, and then if not, then I will proceed with scheduling, because this is an amendment to Title 17. It requires to start the process with a public hearing at Planning and Zoning Commission. So I guess the next step will be I'll check in with city council at a regular meeting, and unless they have any concerns, I'll then proceed with the public hearing process, starting with Planning and Zoning Commission public hearing, and then first and second reading at city council.
Sounds great.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback. I know some people need to sign off in just a few minutes. The next piece that I had was at the last meeting I told the group that if I had the opportunity, I would come back with a comparison of this code package compared to the development agreement ordinance that we discussed at the last meeting. So I can throw that on the screen and kind of narrate that if that is helpful.
Yes, please.
Okay, and I don't, if any of the commissioners who need to sign off, feel free to interrupt me, and if you have any questions or if you just want to say goodbye.
I appreciate all the hard work on this. Hopefully we can get it across the finish line and keep on moving.
Let me just try to maximize this on the screen for everyone. 1 second. Get this perfect. All right. Did I get it? Almost. Okay, start there. Okay, so thanks for giving me the opportunity to provide this comparison. I did not include this in the packet, but I prepared this yesterday and today. I definitely wanted to see if I could answer some questions, because I think there were valid questions about the work that we've been doing with the housing variety amendments, and we've kind of gone back and forth with the discussion of development agreements. And that was, partially in response to city council, because like we just discussed, city council had some questions about how does the housing variety amendment code package relate to PUDs, annexation agreements, and development agreements. And we have some potential projects out there that would provide some public benefits if a development agreement ordinance was adopted. And so we've been kind of not fast tracking, but moving along the development agreement piece of that, and bringing in city council and planning and zoning commission, because there are some of those projects that might be coming down the line. So in order to provide this comparison, I put together this chart, and just to narrate this a bit, the intent of this is to show the differences between the housing variety amendment package and that we just discussed, and the development agreement package. And so you have four columns here. The first column is essentially everything that we had agreed upon going into that city council work session for the housing variety amendments. The second is what we just discussed. So it's essentially removing the targeting 3-unit or more development, and removing the deed restricted community housing piece. So I think that part is relatively clear, because we just agreed upon, that we're supportive of the second column, the code package that would include for the second column. As we start to compare, so we can kind of disregard the first column, if you will, and start comparing the first column with the last two columns. Let's start with comparing the second column with the third column. So what we just reviewed compared to what we reviewed at our last meeting, our last work session. So one of the key differences between the code package that we just reviewed and the development agreement ordinance from the last work session is what is targeting. So in other words, we are anticipating the need for ADUs. We're anticipating the need for duplexes, 2-family dwellings. And so the housing variety anticipates that. And it is in our code, it's a by right process. So we already allow ADUs and duplexes by right. It just requires a building permit. So they essentially just have to get a sign off from me to proceed. It includes some housekeeping, like the density calculation and the definitions that was previously not defined. And it's not requiring deed restrictions or community housing. It's focusing just on ADUs and duplexes. And it's doing that pretty heavily through the dimensional standards, by making things both more permissive and less permissive. So in other words, the building height is getting less permissive for ADUs, but floor area, lot coverage, density is getting more permissive for ADUs and duplexes. Parking is actually getting more restrictive because we're anticipating more ADUs and duplexes, so we're trying to address that with a parking requirement to reduce the impacts on properties. But those are all things that are required by code. And I think did I cut it out? I did. I had a section that said required, yes or no. But these are all things that every developer or every builder, every property owner who is going to build an ADU or a duplex is required to follow that code section. And they are not required to provide any other public benefits that cannot legally be required by code. For example, if someone's building an ADU, you can't require them to give us a portion of their land. For example, you can't require them to build a stormwater pipe across the street. There is in land use law, we call that, and Gabby, I know you'll understand this, we call that a lack of essential nexus, and that would be considered a taking. So you can't do those things with a code requirements because that would be illegal. So that is what that code package does. It's heavily targeted on ADUs, duplexes, by right development, and it's something that we can require. As we compare that to what we reviewed at our last meeting, development agreements, and let me preface this by saying that my experience with development agreements, as you know, I worked in Breckenridge for 7 years, and that municipality has a development agreement ordinance that is very broad. It essentially says, if there's something that you don't comply with in the code, you can apply for a development agreement as part of a site plan development process. It is totally discretionary by the council, and the public benefits that you can provide, and the waivers that you can receive from the zoning code are, it's fairly wide open. There are obviously like affordable housing, being an affordable housing crisis. That is something that is going to be the #1 expectation for the city council to see in an application for a development agreement. But technically, if there was something else that the local government needed that we didn't anticipate, like we needed a crosswalk for in front of a school, and you were developing across the street, it's an offsite. There's no way the city could say we need a crosswalk there, but we probably may have not anticipated that. And so now, as part of this development, that developer, that builder, that property owner can voluntarily enter into a contract in order to receive that code waiver to provide that public benefit. Now, I just mentioned the crosswalk example, like a non-housing example. So that is my experience. And so in other words, I'm used to working with a development agreement ordinance that is very broad. And there was a lot of support for that at the last meeting, of that development agreement ordinance being more broad. And I think, both in terms of the waivers from a code and in terms of the public benefits. And that is actually how I originally approached the city attorney. this, and requested that the broad nature to that development agreement ordinance. The city attorney's office took a couple stabs at that, and the latest was communicating that the city attorney felt very strongly that the development agreement ordinance needed to have some, the term used was guardrails. So in other words, some parameters that just our current city council and our future city council would have. And in terms of approving a development agreement ordinance, development agreement through like a legislative process, through a public hearing process. And the city attorney said, we need to have some parameters, we need to have some guardrails. What are what are the needs that you anticipate for projects that are coming down the line and future projects? And my response to the city attorney's office was that, well, the whole goal of a development agreement ordinance is to have a process that goes through can be more complex public hearing process, but to have a process for the types of developments and the type of public benefits that you just don't anticipate with your zoning code, because there's not a single zoning code in the United States that anticipates every single public need, every single potential code requirement. And so I communicated either with the projects that we have right now, or just really thinking of housing projects, private sector housing projects that might be coming down the line, where, and I mentioned in the last meeting, that are going to have funding gaps. And so in order to try to make the project pencil, there has to be an economy of scale, and the buildings could get dense, the buildings could get tall, and the projects could take a long time. They need to build projects in more than one sequence, more than one phase. And so I started off with recommending that those guardrails be building height, density, and extended vesting, essentially allowing a project to be phased for more than just a few years if needed. And the city attorney wasn't 100% comfortable with that, but they were supportive of drafting an ordinance that included those parameters. The way that came to this group was in the latest version was with actually, I think it was a 12-foot a 12-foot extension of height, and a certain percentage increase in density. But then there was kind of a catch-all third letter below that said, if the city council finds that there's enough public benefit out of this project, essentially there's not a ceiling. So that density could go beyond 1 story. It could go beyond a certain percentage of units of density. So at the last P&Z meeting 2 weeks ago, I think we heard from a good number of the commissioners that they would be more supportive of a development agreement ordinance that didn't necessarily, I'll use the term, box in that ordinance to just building height and just density and extended vesting, and in terms of the standards, and also in terms of the public benefits, not just community housing, not just land and infrastructure. And so I wanted to mention to the commission that is actually my experience in working with development agreements, as I mentioned. But those guardrails, those parameters became highly recommended by the city attorney, and I can go into more detail on that. So I think the options that we have here, so I mean, the intent of this is to show that, one, the comparison between these two ordinances that we kind of have in the works right now, and two, see if the commission, kind of gathering the comments from the last meeting, if the commission would be supportive of me going back to the city attorney and saying, hey, I reviewed this with our planning and zoning commission, and although city council was supportive of the guardrails that the city attorney initially proposed, planning and zoning commission is actually supportive of having less guardrails, so that it's really fully capturing the intent of the development agreement ordinance, is to allow to have a process for developments and public benefits that we do not anticipate with our zoning code. So I'm going to pause there and take any questions.
Do you mind if I go? Because then I have to just sign off. I mean, do you mind if I ask my question first?
Please go ahead, Em.
First of all, thank you for putting this together because I feel like it is really helpful to have a visual, first of all, and it is totally, this right-hand column is totally like what I was trying to spit out last time we had this meeting, but totally failed to get across. So I'm really grateful you put it together, and it's, I think it could be a great reference ongoing. One really dumb question I have is just to like, as an example, when you're looking at the building height line, or actually let's use floor area. If we're looking at column 2 and let's just say looking at column 4. Column 4 for building or development agreements is in relation to column 2, meaning like they'd be asking for an increase in floor area above and beyond what's in code already in column 2, right? I mean, like that seems like a logical assumption, but I guess I just want to make sure. And
Yes.
I guess my final comment is just to say, I think I'm in more agreement with this kind of broader interpretation because I, yet again, don't want to limit ourselves unknowingly. I think my only concern is making sure that we fully understand what the process would be for a development agreement as it goes through the cogs of the city, and to somehow still consider, if it's at full discretion of city council, that we dispel the opportunity for conflicts of interest by somehow, like that's where my concern lies in terms of having guardrails. It would be really nice to know that guardrails would help there be no like conflict of interest that gets pushed through because city council has that interest. Otherwise, I'm in favor of the broad take. Thank you. And in advance, goodbye, everybody. See you next time.
Okay, thanks, Evan. And to answer your question, it would be a legislative process, so it's not quasi judicial like there's an applicant and where it affects a specific property. It would be a legislative matter, so the city council would have to adopt an ordinance to approve someone's development agreement. So the ordinance would say, "City council hereby authorizes the city administrator to enter into the attached development agreement, to enter into a contract with the property owner, builder, et cetera." And that development agreement is, must be in substantial compliance with the form, that's attached to hereto as an exhibit and approved by the city attorney. So it's an ordinance affecting a property, not an application for a permit.
Okay, so I think a good conversation for us to have potentially, unless it feels like a waste of time, which is fine, is just to understand what an ordinance means and how many checks and balances exist for that process.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So I think that's it. And I'm assuming my logic in comparing column 4 to column 2 is correct in terms of the way they relate. And what I was trying to say last time, which is basically a development agreement is for things that outlie what is already in the code and like must be dealt with in that way because it is not contained within the existing code. You must be asking for something different or more.
Right. Okay.
Hey, Chapin, this is Greg. This is going to sound like a sleight of hand, which it is. And that is, if the city attorney really feels strongly that they want guardrails in place, and we were to leave those in place, but we had some sort of a paragraph that was all part of that created leeway in the negotiation. I mean, that sounds contradictory, which it kind of is. But it's the other duties as assigned clause in your employment contract. Could we put something like that into this ordinance that would allow for leeway, even though the guidelines are in place? I don't know.
Whoops, I tried to unmute myself and I think I clicked mute you.
That's all right.
Sorry.
I can take a hint. It's okay.
So I have an answer for that. And so it's kind of like a, half answer. So yes, we can, but additionally for public benefits, but it's already in there for, the zoning standards. So right now, I'll just use, I'll use this. So right now we already have that it's already in the draft ordinance for building height and density. So the way the city attorney drafted it, so this is going back to what I was saying where city attorney says you get up to 12 feet of additional height and you get, can't remember the X percentage of additional density. But if you're the city council, so then that other additional clause, like other duties as assigned clause is, but if the council finds that there's substantial public benefit, then there's not a ceiling. So it's already in there for that, but it's not in there for the public benefits. So public benefits right now, as it is written, is limited to community housing, land, and infrastructure. So I think what I was discussing going back to the city attorney was essentially opening it up for not just zoning standards, but and not, I guess, not just building height and density, but additional standards and also other public benefits.
I think that could get us where we need to be.
Thanks,
Yeah,
I'm taking notes.
I would agree. It seems like it's trending in the right direction and that these additional guardrails or the opposite of guardrails make sense just with the potential development opportunities out there and just the need for some more creativity. So yeah, overall I support them. It seems like a good progression.
I also think, as was pointed out, maybe it's not perfect on the first draft, but we get it passed, and then, based on experience, we decide what changes could be advantageous in the future.
All right, Scott, Mayor Green, any comments?
No, thank you, Chapin. I agree with Adam. This chart is super helpful.
I concur.
All right, so just to make sure I have gathered comments of at least the four commissioners who are remaining online right now. So are we generally supportive of moving forward with kind of I guess me going back to the city attorney and letting the city attorney know that I spoke with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and the Planning and Zoning Commission is generally supportive of a development agreement ordinance that has less guardrails. In other words, more flexibility through the public hearing process that's already in the ordinance, for more flexibility with the zoning standards and additional zoning standards, and more flexibility with public benefits, as long as this is going through the legislative public process through an ordinance, and as long as conflicts of interest are addressed, currently in our code or specifically in this ordinance, and as long as the ordinance clarifies that you can only use this process, apply for this process, if what you are proposing is not already allowed by the zoning code. In other words, the housing variety amendments. Just speak up if you have any concerns with what I just said.
I think that's
Okay, thank you. That's what I needed.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together.
All right, I am anticipating that the city council is gonna, I'm sorry, the city attorney is going to have some concerns with that. Concerns that they've already communicated to me. So I think how this will go forward is, of course, I'll communicate to city attorney, city administrator, and the mayor. So I think that'll be a conversation amongst the four of us. And we will decide how to move forward with this with city council, because this is a change from what we last discussed with city council, although I don't know if city council will be concerned with it or not. I think the main concern is coming from the city attorney. And then, like the housing variety amendments, after I've had a chance to check in with city council in kind of like a TBD manner, then the next steps for the formal process would be essentially 3 public hearings, 1 at Planning and Zoning Commission and 2 at City Council. And actually only 1 of those is a public hearing, but anyways, 3 public meetings. So I will keep the commission updated on the progress for both of these ordinances. I so very much appreciate you hanging in there and strapping in for this technical discussion, and I appreciate all the feedback.
Hey, Chapin, this is Scott. I just wonder, like, with the advice of council, like, is there a way to thread through this where, I mean, if council's throwing up all sorts of red flags, like, is there, like, under their advice, is there a way to get through this process? You know, maybe it's, I don't know, like just verbiage that's better crafted or whatever than what we're putting out there to address the same issue. So, you know, without them like being here to actually like directly advise, like, I would assume that there's a way to move forward, but, you know, not knowing how to do that. I guess, you know, we have these specialists, let's use them, you know.
Sorry, I did the same thing to Scott. I asked him to mute while he was talking, so I unmuted myself. Yeah, good comment, Scott. You know, I think, you know, I've kind of been around and around with the city attorney on this a lot, to be honest. And so, you know, I've actually worked with 2 different attorneys in the city attorney's office, and they kind of elevated me to their main attorney. So I initially was working with a junior attorney on this, and just due to the complicated nature of it, it progressed to the senior attorney. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the reasons why they do not want, you know, they want to have some guardrails. And, you know, I've communicated some of those, but I mean, essentially they're saying that, you know, there's not that many communities in the country that have development agreement ordinances, although it is authorized by Colorado state statute. And the you know, the main community that is using this in Colorado happens to be my former employer, where it's been used for I think for 30 plus years, and I worked under that city attorney. He was my mentor, and they mentioned some lawsuits, which I you know, that there was that Breckenridge was involved in a lot of lawsuits. I have questions about that because I worked there and I wasn't familiar with how their development agreement processes, which have been in place for 30 years, have been challenged. And I also had a lot of experience in seeing how development agreements brought about affordable housing and that would otherwise would not have happened. And so, you know, totally different community, different needs. We don't have to get into that, but you know, the city attorney was pretty clear that they thought that this process could leave things too open-ended for city council to take advantage of. But you know, that you know, the original draft of this also had the city administrator as the approval agency, or the approval authority for this. And I said, absolutely no way. I mean, if they're going to have this process, it needs to be an ordinance, and it needs to go through a fully vetted public process. And and frankly, it needs to be cumbersome. Because we have by right development, we have this, this code package that we are working on, that is trying to make, this smaller infill housing much less cumbersome. But if there are these projects that our zoning code, can't anticipate, I guess maybe I shouldn't say we want it to be cumbersome, but we want it to be fully vetted, and it can only do that through a publicly noticed public process where the public is involved and they have the opportunity to provide comments in multiple settings, and that would be through the legislative process that already exists through city council for an ordinance, and then the ordinance has to be adopted and effective within 30 days later, and then the agreement has to be signed, has to be recorded with the Lake County Clerk and Recorder and show up in the public property records. So when someone buys a property, they can see that their property is affected. So not just a signature by the city manager. So I think I'm providing a very long-winded response here. I think I have an understanding of the city attorney's concerns, and I think that those concerns will remain the same. I think what this is going to come down to is the city attorney having an opportunity to communicate those concerns directly to city council, and making sure that absolutely does happen, so city council can understand the risks that they are up against. But it is the city attorney's job to advise staff and the city council as to risks that we might be entering, and ultimately the city council has to make the decision whether or not to those are acceptable risks. And so I think that's what this is going to come down to. Sorry for the long-winded response.
No, Chapin, you're spot on. I can't tell you how many times, even though I've always liked our city attorneys, I've simply said, no, we're not going to do that. And the reason is they're always going to give you the least risk option that is possible, because they only think in terms of liability. But if that's how you act and react to the world, you'll never get anything done. So I understand exactly where you're coming from, and I understand the city attorney's take on it, but it doesn't make them right.
Hey, Chapin, Scott again. Just for the sake of discussion, like what's the recourse to let's say something goes totally sideways and there's total public outcry, like what's the recourse, I guess, in terms of if we go sideways with something?
Sure. So the standard challenge in like a land use law case is that a decision-making body like city council is acting in an arbitrary and capricious manner that affects a property owner, negatively, poses hardship, and so they didn't follow a certain public process, or what was the other thing that I was going to say, that their decision does not protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the community, and so that is, and there could be other outlying arguments, but that is the core of how land use law, land use law court cases typically involve. And so, so in the ordinance, there would be findings, and this would be part of the process, and the ordinance would say, and frankly, it would be staff's responsibility to address how the public health, safety, welfare is protected, how the city council, if making this decision, would not be acting in an arbitrary and capricious manner. And what was the third thing I mentioned? How there's no unique hardship that's imposed on another affected property owner in a negative way. So I think the answer to your question is how do we mitigate that is one, we have a public process, so that the city council must hear the concerns of the public. Whatever requirements that we can include in the ordinance, we have, so things like addressing public health, safety, and welfare, and that should be considered. and then finding. So when the decision is made, when ordinance is passed by city council, they're not just saying we approve this ordinance and it's in the form, in the development agreement shall be executed in the form that's attached. It is saying that city council has reviewed how this could affect public health, safety and welfare, and finds that it is not affecting it, that it's not imposing undue hardship upon neighboring property owners, and whatever that third thing was that I keep forgetting. So,
Arbitrary.
oh yeah, thank you. That they're not, acting in an arbitrary and capricious manner, and that they have considered this through like a public process.
Hey, that's really informative. I guess, that totally addresses my concern is that this wouldn't be up and above and supersede any other thing that's actually in play in terms of ordinances or policy. So I think that addresses like my concern. And I think it helps guide that process. So thank you.
Okay, good deal. And I think that what was I think that is what M was mentioning with her parting comment, that we should discuss. And so, and that is the answer to that question, is that it's going through a process that already exists.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Good enough?
Yep.
So,
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. I'll pull up the agenda. Morgan, second.
okay, so we're moving on to goal setting 2024. Oh, sorry.
So I don't have any comments on that. I mean, obviously this code work is I'm squeezing it in wherever I can and falling behind on some other things. So that's just going to consume I think the planning department energy for the next few months. So where I can, I'll try to plug in on some of these other items on future agendas. But at this time, I just kind of week by week, 2 weeks by 2 weeks. So I don't know exactly what to bring to this group at the next meeting. But if you have any requests, I'm happy to hear them.
Great. I don't have any requests this time. Did we want to, was there any sort of like public comments from the public, I guess, before we wanted to adjourn?
Steve Prestash is in my office and he's declined to wrap up with public comment.
Okay, then if there's nothing else, I would move to adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:33.
Lobby seconds.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that does it.
Excellent
Thank you
job.
all. Thank you all so much for your attentiveness and your feedback tonight.
For sure.
Well-
Yeah, thanks for the hard work. Appreciate it.
Well, the hard work. That's awesome, Chapin. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, y'all.